Hi, I'm Matt Roberts with D1 Ticker and Athletic Director U from the NCAA Convention. Happy to be joined by Travis Goff, still relatively new AD at Kansas. I want to dig into some nuances about being a new AD, and you've certainly been in the media quite a bit. You had to hire a new football coach right when you got to Lawrence. There's some, I'm sure, advantages, disadvantages to that. That process has been covered in detail. I'm curious to start with, as a new AD, there's probably some in your staff and around the department who are ready to agree with almost anything you say about where you want to go, what you need to get done. How do you sort of avoid that groupthink mentality and the yes mentality, encourage vigorous and passionate debate to get to the right answers early on in the AD tenure?
Yeah, really important. First of all, thanks for the opportunity, Matt. I'm glad you called me new. I'm going to ride the
Still
new
new
thing. Oh, trust me, we could be talking in a year, and I'm going to say new, emphasize new.
It does expire at some point, but right now
rookie
it's still new.
And new as long as I can be.
That's right.
Yeah, it's important. It's really important. In every opportunity, every meeting, every session you have, every staff meeting, you have a chance as a leader to set the right tone in that regard, to make sure that there isn't much in the way of groupthink, that there isn't just a natural default line to agreeing with my particular sentiment. And so I think it's really more about making sure you set that tone right off the bat, demonstrating early a willingness to not just listen to different perspectives, but literally change stance right then and there. And I've had
Intentionally to continue the debate?
Yeah, I think those opportunities have presented themselves. I can think back on multiple occasions where I felt pretty strongly about a stance at some juncture, and then through conversation, I've realized, you know what, they got it. And those wins, so to speak, for others and other leaders in the department are really important. And then I think you got to reiterate it over and over and over again, that, hey, this is about our stance, our perspective, our philosophy. It's not, mine as the athletic directors that's going to win the day each and every time.
And Jim Collins writes a lot about this in Good to Great, Built to Last, this passionate debate, and some leaders who even say to their teams, we're not walking out of here until we disagree, right?
Yeah.
And the value of understanding and thinking through each angle of an opportunity.
For sure. And if we've learned anything with everything that's going on in college athletics, it's that you can't just default back to old thinking, old habits, former perspectives. You have to really challenge the heck out of yourself and out of your department and your staff to make sure you're not doing that.
Any specific examples maybe that come to mind to you right off top on early on of maybe going into a meeting thinking this is where we need to end up, walking out going, hey, I see this perspective now?
I mean, I'd say there's probably two subject matters that we've had really good, rigorous, honest, open, and then ever-evolving thought process. Alston, how are we going to handle Alston at KU? What's nationally happening? What's in the realm of possibility? And then what makes sense at our place? Because if you can't afford it, right, or if you've got financial barriers,
sure, or
if you've got philosophical elements that you want to have be part of how we might apply the Alston opportunity to our place, then they need to be true to KU.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be that, well, we read this and that's what they're doing, and darn it all, that's where we need to default. And then I would tell you, NIL, I mean, every conversation we have about NIL, you might come in thinking in a particular manner, and you might have early alignment there, and then before you know it, it shifts off path, and you end up in a better place.
Are you ready to say where you're going to land on the Alston case stuff?
I can.
And how
I
it
can
fits
speak,
for KU?
Yeah, I mean, we're trending well. There's still not the clear answer in terms of how it can be applied. I still think we're all, at least we should be, awaiting some better clarification on it. But where we're trending is we need to, at our place, at least in the onset, year 1, year 2, year 3, however that timeline plays itself out, we need to apply it based on percentage that our student athletes are on athletics aid, right? So if you're 25%, you can tap into 25% of the Alston opportunity that's been applied. And then one thing that I don't know if it's going to be unique or an anomaly or where it fits, but philosophically, I believe at our place, we're going to have some standards associated. So it's not just the very bottom
maintaining
bar.
eligibility.
Yeah, if you're eligible, right, then you get, hey, listen. And it's going to have to be somewhat subjective, right? You can put all the different benchmarks that you want, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have conversations around, whether it be disciplinary issues, whether it be, very much shortcomings academically.
Sure.
The things that matter, I think, to use it not as a stick, so to speak, but really as another carrot that I think is something that should be a motivating factor for student athletes.
Interesting. We'll be curious to learn more about that as you develop it.
Yeah.
Another challenge as an early AD, really for any AD, lots of people want a piece of your schedule and your calendar. I'm interested to learn more about how you prepare not only yourself, but as you're going into a team meeting, whether it's compliance-related issue, fundraising and development, external campus, what your prep process is like, and how you dictate to your staff how they need to be prepared coming into meetings. What comes to mind for me, and Amazon's got this famous brief and memo system they use. They got rid of PowerPoints in like 2004.
Yeah, right.
Whomever is leading the meeting has to prepare a brief,
right.
and they spend the first 20 minutes of the meeting. Everybody there is reading the memo. I think it avoids groupthink some, but it also is meant to be efficient. Yeah. As we know, 10 people in a room for an hour, that's a lot of man hours, it's a lot of work not getting done. How do you view that?
Yeah, well, I think, again, it's an evolution. So 9 months in my tenure as AD, the first thing I prioritized was real and sincere relationship building. So my meetings didn't need to be super efficient for the first X weeks and certainly even X months. As I look back, it needed to be establishing rapport. It needed to be an opportunity for me to know who those individuals are, what's driving them, what challenges they're facing, and then for me to have a chance, obviously, in each of those sessions to reinforce what I'm about.
Yeah.
Right, and what we're going to be about collectively. And so efficiency wasn't the first and foremost a focal point early on. Now, it has shifted, right, as the calendar just gets completely jammed up and you really focused on some of the most important factors. I'm probably undergoing it as we speak, a little bit more discipline around my calendar, a little bit more accountability for the people managing my calendar or who have influence in where the thing goes, and then making sure that staff understand what we are trying to achieve in those sessions. So no real, again, science to it. One thing we've just done is kind of roll out a little bit of a shift in how we handle our executive staff. And again, whether it's profound or not profound, I'm excited about it. I think it will create more efficiencies. And we'll see how that plays out.
Are you open to talking more about that? Or
Yeah,
is that
sure.
like a competitive advantage?
No, not at all. It's been stated to the department, to the leadership, so I'm happy to speak to it. Again, nothing real profound with it. You've got an executive staff. At my place, we've got an AD's cabinet, 4 deputy athletic directors, a chief of staff, and then within that AD's cabinet, right, what you don't want to do is just with the deputies and with the chief of staff is not provide opportunities for others to bring real critical elements to those smaller sessions, right? The more intimate, tighter sessions that you have to have in a big department. And so I'm making sure that we have a system and a process to bring key people into those sessions when and where necessary. I could think of a number of examples. There's going to be moments where we'll have to, in a smaller group, really drill down into NIL and where things are evolving or shifting. We're going to absolutely have to have our DEI leader, our leader of inclusive excellence, as we're calling it at KU, in those sessions. Because otherwise you run the risk of that not being the priority you stated is. Right? So it can't just be the big exec staff's sessions that drive the highest level of engagement and conversation. So that's what the AD cabinet structure is about. And then, of course, executive staff at our place, it's probably 25 people. It's a big group, representative of the leadership of the department. The expectations for how to make those efficient is identify, to me, it's about 10 areas that represent what the priorities are for the department, right? Revenue generation, development, student-athlete well-being, right? There's so much in that space. Inclusive excellence, and I could go on and on and on. There's a whole host of them, compliance, legal, et cetera. And what I've said is there's representatives of the 25 exec staff members who are going to serve on these kind of working groups, subgroups, so to speak, of these 10 priorities. And the expectation every 2 weeks and the work that occurs between meeting A to meeting B is that pod, for lack of a better word, is meeting, coordinating, making sure that they show up to that next executive staff session ready to have a more comprehensive report on that priority. And I think it does a few things. I mean, it does, I think, create efficiencies. It creates focus. It makes sure that people aren't just showing up and reporting out, that there's been some strategic thinking going on there. And then I think the other thing it does is it brings people together and work together that otherwise wouldn't naturally happen. Right. So I could come up with some examples of that. But I'm hopeful around where that will make for more effective, strategic, and efficient leadership sessions.
A year from now, I'll be interested to hear your feedback on how you've tweaked, how that's gone, where you're going with that whole process.
Probably would have blown it up completely.
You may
have failed, but hey, we'll give it a shot.
Got to give it a run. Given somebody with your background, having raised hundreds of millions of dollars, Northwestern, Tulane, KU when you first started, of course, some of the principles we're talking about, and interestingly, when I contacted you about this conversation, I told you I wanted to talk kind of the guts of fundraising as a new AD, and you're like, hey, straightforward, it's these things. I thought, wow, well, we can dig into each of those.
Right.
But some of the principles we've talked about so far in terms of strategic planning for fundraising, and I've got this picture in my head of somebody with your background having this big board in their office and going, here's this matrix of all my major donors, here are all my home football and basketball games, here's how many touch points I want to have. And obviously it's not a big board, it's a CRM system, right?
Yeah.
Like it's
sure.
software.
Sure.
But how do you think about being efficient with your time before football games, before basketball games, making sure you're making the rounds? Who's helping you with like, hey, we got to make this next stop? How does that process work?
Well, thinking back to my start date, which was this last April, hired a football coach. That was important. Had to get that done and get that done right, most importantly. And then as I looked at the calendar, okay, we've got the summer stretch. Well, that's a chance maybe as a new AD to settle in, spend a lot of time internally, have conversations, which you do all those things. But what I said was, what I've got to demonstrate is a willingness to go to where our people are, our very best people. And so I said to development, book it up. You can grab the calendar 2, 3, sometimes 4 days a week and get me out there to just set that particular tone. And that meant traveling, right? That meant being on planes when, even with the pandemic and COVID, there wasn't as much of that going on. I wanted to make a really focused, concerted effort to demonstrate that to our best people. So covered a lot of ground. What I didn't want to do was run the risk of people thinking that I was just going to take the convenient path, which is game day.
Sure.
Game day is pop by the suite, say a quick hello, spend a few minutes with somebody at a pregame event or reception. That to me wasn't going to make the statement I wanted to make about a sincere commitment to establishing a real relationship with these individuals. And so I look back on that really thankful. I prioritized it. The easy way out would be to say, I don't feel like traveling because there's so much going on internally. And rather, what we did, I think, was really set the right tone for our best people. So that was the early part of it. And then, of course, you get into the fall, and it does have to be more efficient. You're not going to be able to just travel, 2-3 times a week to get out in front of people. But the foundational elements haven't changed. How do you just make sure you're establishing great rapport in real relationships? That's been the strategy in about every aspect, whether it be across campus with campus leaders, establish rapport, establish a relationship. Same story as you think about donors and other constituents.
How many visits off campus do you think you've made so far in your tenure?
It's had to have been
over 50.
Yeah, I was going to call it 75 to 90, somewhere in that range.
Right.
And again, it hasn't just been Lawrence, it hasn't just been Kansas City, it's been obviously multiple states, multiple communities out there.
You said establishing rapport and establishing relationships. When you jump into a football coaching search immediately, are there actually some disadvantages in that process because it does not allow you potentially to establish as quickly the rapport and relationships you would like to across campus?
Yeah, I'd say that felt like the one piece that at the time was less than ideal, right? You've got to do this, but you also want to, again, build relationships with your own staff, your department, student athletes, campus, donors, etc. But then at the end of the day, that was going to be the strongest statement I could make as our new leader to the entire, Kansas community, so to speak, is what was this coaching hire going to say about who I was, my leadership approach, and then how we were going to go about adding really important layers of leaders to the department. And so I really, maybe not as much at that moment, but in hindsight, I really appreciate what that statement was able to make beyond just hiring a football coach. The process of being inclusive, having a real committee that was going to have a voice, wasn't just my hire, it was going to be our hire. Opportunities day one to make sure I had a really good cadence of communication with the chancellor, fantastic. Opportunities before we launched into the search to have at least done Zoom sessions with key donors, former football players, other stakeholders to get their voice in where KU needed to go with football and with a new head coach, and it ended up being really invaluable.
There's this underlying theme too that I'm sort of fascinated with. You may learn very quickly too about how people are aligned within the organization and who's trying to influence a decision like that one very quickly. And you knew Lawrence. Now, you hadn't been at KU for years, but
Right.
you understood part of the culture.
Right.
Is that were you surprised maybe at how different people tried to leverage your decision? Did you learn almost without talking to them directly how they were going to interact with you once you were done with the search in terms of how they were trying to influence the search?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, it's maybe speaking in part to how you posed it. I've been amazed and have said it multiple times over at how little people tried to influence where we went with that football hire. It is maybe one of the most remarkable things I've experienced in this tenure, and I can even think back over my career, where you just expect that, right? You expect to be hearing from donors.
Right.
You expect there to be this really strong stance or sentiment even internally. Campus leadership, chancellor, had none of it. It was incredible. And so we went out on that search, and I wasn't distracted. I wasn't fielding calls in between the focus that needed to be there on hiring the right leader for Kansas football. I'd done, I think, the right work early on from a donor stakeholder perspective to make sure they had a voice early. But at that juncture, and once we launched into it, I wasn't distracted by that, and people weren't pushing and weren't influencing. And the chancellor trusted me to go and lead that.
You might be the first AD ever.
It's possible, and I still look back and think back and go, gosh, it really played that way.
Interesting.
It really did. So that was one of the things that ensured that we really could go out and have a process, a disciplined process, and let the thing unfold naturally.
If you ever do a men's basketball search at Kansas, I got a feeling it might be a little different. Good to catch up. Great to see you.
Yeah.
Good luck with things. We'll catch up down the road.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Travis.
Good to see you.